Coming up this episode, I have a conversation with Chris Rogers, host of the Apt EVs Podcast. We talk about Aptera, the company, the vehicle, and we dive into a lot of really great details. This is one that you don't want to miss. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 126 of the EV Resource Podcast. I'm Zach Hurst, and each week I bring you the latest EV news, information, and interviews with industry experts. As a note, before we get to the conversation with Chris, this was originally recorded back in January of this year, 2022. It is now the end of October, so just keep that in mind. Most of the information is still very relevant, and I think you're going to get a lot out of it. So with that being said, let's get right to it. So Chris, I want to thank you for coming on the EV Resource Podcast to talk about Aptera and what they've got going on. I have a feeling that we're both going to really enjoy this conversation today.
Likewise, and thank you for having me on. I'm excited to talk with another EV enthusiast and to talk about Aptera.
Absolutely. So, let's just dive right in. For people who don't know and have never heard the name Aptera, what is it that we're going to be talking about?
So we will be talking about the most efficient way to transport two people from point A to point B, and that happens to be in an ultra aerodynamic, efficient, three-wheeled electric vehicle. That's what we'll be talking about.
That sounds great. There's been a lot of talk about efficiency in the EV space recently with, of course, Lucid and their recent 70 mile per hour range test where they hit 500 miles of range. Aptera is taking a different approach than almost any other manufacturer out there. Without diving into too many details, what is it that really makes them special when you compare to your traditional automobile?
Yeah, so the big difference with Aptera is that they make efficiency, the efficiency of the vehicle in terms of aerodynamics, the coefficient of drag, and everything that goes into that would impact the range of the vehicle, the core focus of the vehicle, and then everything else flows from there. And so when you talk about Lucid, which has an incredibly low coefficient of drag, I'm blanking on the exact numbers, but I know Lucid and the new Tesla Model S Plaid are both around 0.20. One might be at 0.208. And so those are incredibly efficient vehicles when you compare what's on the market right now. But they made those vehicles that aerodynamic low coefficient of drag, that's incidental to the overall goal of the vehicle. For Aptera, they started with a question of what is mathematically the most efficient way of moving two passengers from point A to point B. And that resulted in a shape that can be described as either a cambered airfoil or the Morelli body. And it's a very unique shape. They can also say it's inspired by the body of a shark with the way that it moves along the floor of the ocean. And it looks entirely different. The three-wheel design is a result of their focus on efficiency, because rolling resistance will impact the range of a vehicle. If you have less wheels, you have less resistance. That's also the reason why the vehicle is made out of composites, because the weight of the vehicle impacts its overall range. And so they looked at everything. They modeled out what this would look like, and the result is the Aptera.
Sure. So they didn't start with a design in mind and work out the engineering of the car around that. They started with the engineering and ended up with a design.
Exactly. They went through the engineering, and then they said, all right, well, how could we make this more comfortable? How could we make this more rideable? How could we make this more practical? But when you focus on efficiency, it's the same reason the Aptera looks a certain way for the same reason that most planes look very similar. They have a very similar shape because they're also focusing on their weight and moving through the air and aerodynamics. And so you tend to end up with the same shape.
Sure. Now, it's my understanding that the vehicle that we know as the Aptera today isn't what they originally started with, that this is kind of a reboot of not only the vehicle, but also the company. Can you dive into the history or the origin of Aptera, and maybe if you know why they kind of stumbled and didn't really gain the traction that they have now, originally, early on?
Sure. So as I've learned over the course of multiple webinars and conversations where their founders have talked about their co-founders. So their origin story starts way back in 2006, when their co-founders, Chris Anthony and Steve Fambro, they came in with experience in fluid dynamics. I think that Steve is a pilot and Chris Anthony had been working I think in boating in some way, and they use a lot of composites. And I don't recall how they knew each other, but they ended up coming up with this idea of how could we make an ultra efficient vehicle? And it didn't start out as an EV. I think they were targeting something that would get 100 miles per gallon, and that ended up evolving into a hybrid vehicle that did, I believe, get over 100 miles per gallon. It had the same overall shape, and they kicked things off in 2006. They raised a few $1,000,000. They're focusing on how could we reduce the cost, same overall goal. And within a few years of that happening, there are a couple of really big problems that are kind of interrelated happen. The first is that, Chris and Steve, they're not auto industry execs, and they brought in a management team that did have auto industry experience. But it seemed that the vision of their new management team didn't necessarily align with that of the co-founders. And the second problem was that they started pursuing this Department of Energy loan, which is from the same program that helped get Tesla started.
Mm-hmm.
But because it wasn't a four-wheeled vehicle, they didn't qualify for the loan. And they ended up basically going, and that was kind of the beginning of the end there, where they spent years fighting the decision of denial. And eventually the Department of Energy said, all right, fine, we'll give you the loan, but you're going to need to raise, I don't know, maybe $100 million on top of what you've already raised. They couldn't do it. By that point,
Yeah,
Chris and Steve they left the company. They were no longer there. And then this leads to this kind of the dark ages of Aptera, because the company went into bankruptcy and liquidated, and someone purchased the assets, the IP to the company. And I guess in 2018 they passed away, and their estate, I guess, never registered their interest in the intellectual property, and so it ended up reverting to Chris and Steve, the original co-founders.
Oh, wow.
And so that's how the company restarted, was that all of a sudden they found themselves in control of the intellectual property again. It was around 2018, 2019, and the whole electric vehicle landscape it changed. And so, they no longer had to find bespoke options for everything from, the doors to the motors to the software to run it. You could buy most of the stuff off the shelf. And so they sat down and they said, well, could we do this? And they said, I think we can. I think we'll get a little bit of interest in this, and we'll make a few thousand a year. And the rest is history, because they've been absolutely blown. They've reportedly been, or they've stated this, they were blown away by the response of, they're like, oh, could we do this again?
Right.
Will people give us a second chance? And they did.
I've seen two social media ads basically for Aptera. One is to pre-order and to get in line for your own car. And then the other is that they're still asking for, it seems, grassroots investors, people like you or me that can throw them a couple bucks. Normally when you see a car company, you don't see both of those at the same time. Normally you see, hey, give us all your money so that we can build these cars, or hey, we have the money now, here, come buy our car. So I've found that somewhat interesting. It's still going to be somewhat of a niche vehicle. I mean, this is not going to be something that is replacing the Corolla or even any other two-seater out there, because I think of that design for maximizing the efficiency really has come with a radical look. So I think that probably will be very off-putting for a lot of people. Personally, I like that because that means you won't see them around every street in the country. They'll still be somewhat of a unique, rare car. And for somebody like me, and probably other people that are waiting in line to take delivery of a vehicle, we don't want that to be a non-special experience. We want that to be special. We want the I don't know if it's a status thing or attention or what, but it's like, hey, uh, it is a car that people will stop what they're doing if they're walking down the sidewalk and go, okay, what the hell is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And from my perspective, the way that I view cars in general is growing up, there were certain cars that I found absolutely fascinating. I used to love Ferraris and Lamborghinis, but also cars that were far less expensive. I used to find myself fascinated by I think the 80s Caprice, the early 90s Caprice. For some reason, I was always fascinated by. There was a two-door Cutlass, Oldsmobile Cutlass, that I really liked for a number of reasons. And my interest in vehicles and cars changed over the years, where I really just stopped wanting to put time and energy and effort and costs into maintaining them. In fact, I specifically moved to cities where I would not have to own a car because I didn't want to deal with it. And so for me, when I saw Aptera, they call their first prototype the Paradigm, because it's a paradigm shift in automotive design. And and it's very much true, because once it clicked to me what they were doing and the performance that was resulting from what they were doing, I can't look at other cars as anything but a waste of resources. And so when I see it, I don't see it for the uniqueness in terms of I have a car that looks different and I find that special. I see it as just the kind of the mathematical engineering base of, if I own that car, I will spend less money and resources on my car than if I own anything else. And it doesn't make sense for me to own something that I'm just going to be pouring money away for what? For aesthetics. Like I cannot look at SUVs now after looking at Aptera as not just a tremendous waste of money and inefficiency. And I just think, why do we do this? Why have we designed our auto industry this way? Like, what is so aesthetically appealing over losing money over 20 miles, 16 miles per gallon in an SUV? That does not jive with me. And so the Aptera speaks to me on a deeper level than any vehicle ever.
So let's dive into the specs of the car itself. I mean, we've already mentioned it's a two-seater, extremely aerodynamic, but I want to touch on some of the other specifications about the vehicle, because one of the biggest hurdles that people have in today's EV market is range. For whatever reason, in the US anyway, consumers think that they want a car that has a 5 or 6 or 700 mile range, when as an EV owner and every other EV owner I know, you don't need that much. You really don't. But Aptera is actually providing, at least the top of the line, a number that's a bit more than that.
It's a comical range, and something that I didn't think about until maybe when there were some conversations about the Lucid Air, which had its EPA rated 440 miles of range, I think, somewhere around there. It's very long, where people mention that, actually sitting in a car for that amount of time, most people cannot hold their bladder for the amount of time that it would take to. So you don't actually gain anything over. So you have to stop at some point, and you can just align that. But this is again, their comical range wasn't something that they started out with. We think we can make a car that can have world-breaking range. They started out, we want to make the most efficient car, and then it turned out that in the most efficient two-door vehicle and the amount of batteries that you can fit in it, you end up with their math says their top of the line version will be able to go 1,000 miles, which is 1,600 kilometers, which is I don't know any person who is going to drive 1,000 miles without stopping, or why you would ever need to do it. But the 600-mile range is also absurd, and so they're going 1,000, 600 miles, 400 miles, 250. Their bottom, their tiniest battery, lowest range version would be the top of the line of most EV companies at 10 watt hours per mile. And so what that means is that a 25 kilowatt hour pack will get you 250 miles there. And then they have the 40 kilowatt hour pack for 460 and then 100. And that was based off of, that's actually something that I'm really curious about when they get to the production version, if there will be efficiency gains that actually mean that it's not that, that neat. And so maybe it's more efficient than 10 watt hours per mile, in which case the 250 mile range version will maybe be slightly smaller. Maybe it will end up being 22 kilowatt hours, or maybe it will end up being slightly less efficient. And so they'll need to go with like something like a 27. But I'm curious as to when they get through beta production, if what it ends up shaking out to be, or if they round up to those ranges or something.
Well, and that kind of efficiency number, I'm not sure if I'm flipping it around properly to be relevant to what you just said. Like I have a Chevy Spark EV, which is fairly efficient. In the summertime, driving around the city, 5 or even 6 miles per kilowatt hour of energy used is normal for that car. But most EVs get 4 miles per kilowatt hour or less. So to be able to do 250 miles with less than 30 kilowatt hours is just unheard of. And there's a lot of benefit to that. One, of course, is going to weigh less, which means it's even more efficient. But then when you have less battery in a car, you have less cost.
Yep. And I just want to make a quick correction there. It's 100 watt hours per mile is what they're not talking. 10 watt hours per mile, I think would mean, I think the math works out that the range would be even more absurd than what it is. And this is where I'm exposing myself as I think the Stanford undergrads say, I'm a fuzzy, not a techie, which is why I don't really excel in math.
No worries.
But yeah, I think this is how you get to their price that they're charging. This is how the 250 model version starts at $25,900, and their 1,000 mile version, it starts at $44,500, I believe, and that's not without an extra motor. That's the dual motor version. It's not adding on extra features. But when you look at the market for electric vehicles right now, it's usually governed by, you're right, it's governed by the battery size and the range. And the larger the range, the higher the cost. Mm-hmm. Tesla really led the way with their Model 3, with coming in at around, they were targeting $35,000. What you could actually buy ended up being a little bit higher than that. And they've been around there. There have been some recent price increases, but the Tesla's starting at around 250 miles of range. You get a Chevy Bolt, it's $30,000, $35,000, $37,000, 250, 260 miles of range. But then $10,000 undercutting that, and it's because you get that's the benefit of the focusing on efficiency. You focus on efficiency, you need less storage to go the same distance, to do the same amount of work that you would otherwise do. Just why the Hummer EV is going to be such a it's
going to be a Hummer. It's just because it's using electricity instead of gas or diesel doesn't mean that it's any more efficient. It's still going to be a dog.
Yeah, that Hummer is, as a clean energy advocate and as an EV enthusiast, I don't want to criticize someone who wants to make the transition to electric vehicles, but man, that is going to be, the Model X is a heavy vehicle. The Rivian is supposedly a very heavy EV. That Hummer is just going to be, is going to basically need the mining output of a small country in order to make, one Hummer EV, which,
Yeah,
maybe not
I
necessarily the
mean,
best use of resources. What are you going to do?
yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that. For right now, until we're all driving electric vehicles, then the Hummer is still a
Yep.
better option. But once we've
Yes.
gone all electric, well, now that is the worst possible choice. When looking at it from an efficiency standpoint, of course.
Yes.
Now when you go online with Aptera to the configurator, aside from paint and battery size, there are a couple of other different ways that you can configure the vehicle. One that I got really excited about was, and I think you nodded to it, the tri-motor option, where it's a three-wheeler. So this would make it all-wheel drive. There's a performance gain to that I was actually quite shocked by in terms of 0 to 60.
Yep.
Now, if I'm remembering correctly, I was reading 3.5 seconds.
That's what they have on their website, and it would make it quicker than a Porsche 911, I believe. And it was something that I initially thought about when I made my reservation of, oh, I want this. And then I thought about it and I said, no, that's too much for me. I could not handle this 0 to 60, 3.5 seconds. And interestingly, well, maybe only to the Aptera enthusiast audience, I remember one of their chief engineers, he went on a few different podcasts early in 2021, and he claimed that it could probably do faster than it accelerate faster than 3.5, but they're sticking to 3.5
Sure,
on
in terms
maybe
of their
it's
claim for now.
yeah, maybe that's a durability thing where they realize it's like, well, we could do something, but you will destroy your tires, or there will be all sorts of problems. So they're gonna limit it in somewhat, but it's yeah, $25,000 or $26,000 for an EV with 250 miles of range and accelerates faster than a 911.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, where do I sign up? Like, I mean, that's just that. I come from a background of the motorsport. I'm a car guy. I love going fast. I love getting to a fast speed as quick as possible. So 2.5 seconds would probably still not be enough for me. But all things considered, there's a certain aspect of safety where if you're accelerating faster than somebody thinks you're going to, you could punch it as they're pulling out in front of you, and now you got to make sure that you can stop just as quick. So hopefully the brakes will be really good too. The other thing that really sets Aptera apart actually is sitting on its roof, and I want you to talk about what they're doing with that and why that's so significant.
Yeah, so it's funny that we've gone this long without talking about it, but one of the most eye-catching or features of the vehicle is that there is solar integrated into the roof, and not just the roof. They tried to figure out ways that they could incorporate it into all of or as many surfaces as possible. And so it comes standard. There are 2 chevrons on the rear of the vehicle solar panels. They put solar panels on the dashboard of the vehicle, and so there's a few of them there. And the options that you have is default. It comes with solar on the roof of the vehicle and the dashboard and the 2 chevrons in the back, and then you can also have them added to the hood of the car and have the entire rear hatch also be solar. And they are estimating, and now this is based off of what they've said is that one of the co-founders, he basically set up a mule Aptera in his backyard, and he saw what the production was over the course of the year, and that gave them the estimate that their biggest configurator, I think, is like 40 kilowatt hours. Excuse me, would get you about 40 miles of range a day from their most robust. And that's in sunny San Diego. That means if you go with a basic roof version, you're looking at somewhere maybe around 10 to 15.
Mm-hmm.
And if you did the full solar package in a cloudier region like I am in New York, then it'll be lower. But you're in addition to being the most efficient vehicle, you know, the they this is another thing that they didn't start out with the idea of we're going to make a solar electric vehicle. The solar solely arose based off of their efficiency, where they realized that when you have it once you pass a certain efficiency threshold, any amount of energy, or excuse me, or anything that you add to that vehicle, it requires less. And so, in the past, other people have said that it's a waste to add solar panels to the vehicle, and that's because they're so inefficient that you're going to get a trickle from the solar panels, and that's not going to be meaningful. But a trickle for an Aptera is up to 40 miles or maybe more a day in a sunny region. And that's where one of their branding things, they talk about never charge, and whether that will actually happen, that's unknown. But potentially, if you drive less than it charges from the solar and you're able to park it outside, you will not charge your Aptera.
Yeah, the average commute for people here in the US is 39 miles a day, round trip. That's average. So of course there will be people that drive more, but there will also be a lot of people that drive less. Here in the Richmond area, if I work downtown, I live maybe 15 miles from downtown, depending on, exactly where you'd go. So somebody could live out in the suburbs, commute downtown and back 30 miles. And yeah, on a really nice sunny day, if their car's parked at work for 8 hours out in the sun, and then they go home and it's parked at home, maybe they would need to plug in every other day. I mean, what it does, even if it doesn't eliminate charging completely, it gives you the option of charging on 110 and getting everything you need from that, where you don't need to then install a level 2 charger at your house, but then you charge as minimally as possible. I mean, you could go to a level 2 charging station once a week probably and have everything that you'd need for that week, adding, of course, the solar on top of that. So what I think is very significant about that is not necessarily never charge, but that you could have a vehicle that you don't have to worry about. Did I plug it in last night? Crap, I forgot to plug it in last night. How much range do I have? Am I going to get to work? That's not a realistic scenario with the Aptera. I also think it would be great as a second or third EV in a family, because then you don't have to worry about, like, we have 2 EVs right now. We have the Spark EV and the Model 3. Well, there are days when we've driven both of them and they both need to charge at night, but we have one charger. So then we have to choose, which of course, usually the Model 3 gets priority. So the Aptera, we could add that in our driveway without changing our needs here at home for charging, which I think, even if I did need to charge it, well, I could just hook it into the regular wall outlet outside, and then you're fine. You're probably not gonna have that much of a need. Do you know by chance how quickly it will charge? I mean, it's gonna have level 2 capability. It should also have a DC fast charging capability as well. Is that right?
Yes, and off the top of my head, I'm blanking on it. I know that I remember when their first webinars, they talked about this a lot. But what they're very proud about the vehicle is because it's so efficient, and because the batteries are relatively small, because a smaller amount of charge for an Aptera will get you more range than it will get you on any other electric vehicle, because of its efficiency. And so that means, that's why one of the things they're saying is that you could use a 110 outlet. I'm blanking on what they said it would get you overnight, but it might be, or I think it said something about maybe 60 miles overnight. And I think you're exactly right in terms of what a solar electric vehicle and the most efficient solar electric vehicle will change for EV driving is that, I don't have an EV, and so I'm saying this based on secondhand sources, but there's a little bit of drain from lithium ion batteries. But with a solar electric vehicle, if there's any kind of sunshine, at minimum, it's just whatever that drain is, it's just going to be static, and so there will be no. I think it's what you're saying is you get up in the morning and you didn't charge it, but you know that you have enough to get to your destination, and once you get to your destination, it's going to stay at that level or possibly increase. If it was at 10% battery, when you come back, it'll be at 12%. There's right now you have to do that calculation of like, well, I'm at 10% now, but I think that when I get there, I'll be at 8%. And over the course of 8 hours, it might be around, 6 or 7. Whereas with your Aptera, it's going to be, no, like it is what it is. And it may end up being more if it's a sunny day. And the question is going to be, what will be the free miles that you'll get? And we haven't even gotten into, this is indirect, but the implications for the infrastructure in any country are massive. At a time when we're considering making massive, charging infrastructure upgrades, level 2 charging, high-speed charging, DC fast charging, and the number of stations you would need for the entire country to go electric. If your vehicle is efficient, you wouldn't need to make these sort of investments in order to provide a meaningful amount of range. Now, as you mentioned, because it's a niche vehicle, the number of people who are going to get an Aptera at start, it's not the same number who are going to get Hyundai Ioniq or or Tesla or something like that.
Right.
But it will alleviate the infrastructure demands, not just of individual consumers for having to install that at their homes, but for cities. If everyone in a town owns an Aptera, you probably don't need the same kind of charging infrastructure if everyone has a Rivian, and are going on adventures with their very large batteries. It's a when you go through logically in your head, it's fascinating the implications of efficiency for a vehicle and transportation.
Yeah. I want to talk about the charge port, the connector style. At least from what I've seen, it looks almost identical, if not identical, to the Tesla plug, that Tesla proprietary plug. Do you know anything about that? Is Aptera going to be using Tesla parts or Tesla's charging in any way?
So from what I understand is because they've been asked about this a lot, it was something that people identified in that first video that I saw back in December of 2020, that they're using the plug, and it was a Tesla plug. And the explanation that I've seen, so there's two things that they've said, or a few things they've said. The first is that they're in a startup and they're developing an electric vehicle, and the Tesla plug was the easiest thing to build into a vehicle in order to test it. And so they use a Tesla plug. It was easier. They could find them off the shelf. They liked it better than the alternative. Mm-hmm. And they've been asked, and they've been kind of coy about this, because Tesla has put out some messaging that they might open up their supercharger network, and it sounds like, I'm speculating on this, but based on my read, they have contacted Tesla about joining their supercharger network, and they either have not gotten approval to do so, they've gotten a rejection, or they were given a cost that they could not afford in order to do so. And so I don't think that it's going to ship with a Tesla plug, and I don't think they're going to launch with capability of plugging into the supercharger network. I don't see that happening. And they're making they're trying to make their parts agreements, because they're not a fully vertically integrated company. They're trying to find out, where are the best places they can most efficient way to purchase things off the shelf. And we're in the midst of a global supply chain crunch, not to mention COVID, that makes all of this more challenging. And so, they could say, oh, we're going to do beta testing and validation, but that really means 1,000 activities and steps and areas where things go wrong, where, they could get unlucky with expectations that don't match, what they're doing. They made some pretty big changes, I think, to the suspension of the vehicle and some tweaks to the body of the vehicle based off of their testing during the alpha development phase. And, they're out on the track, and hopefully that the news will all be good, where they'll say, oh, it was even better than we expected. And not, oh, we think we need to go back to the drawing board because it's still too squeaky and rattly and not durable, and we don't think we can manufacture it. But
Right.
it's, they've got a long way to go to get to, they said production intent by the end of this year. But, I think there are a lot of things that are out of their control that could easily push that back, which has happened to pretty much every, bigger, more well-funded EV startups like Lucid and
Yep.
Rivian that made big promises of when they were going to deliver their vehicles. And then it's like Rivian squeaked to I may be saying this wrong. It was either, I think 3 wasn't a number, so it was either 300 or 3,000 that they got last year. And it's like they've got Amazon's billions and everybody, and it's like they still, just got like a few out last year. So we'll
Yeah.
see.
Yeah, I mean, even Tesla, as at this point, the ones that can make EVs, I say better in terms not of build quality for a car, but better in terms of the manufacturing process. Tesla's lead, if you will, is in their manufacturing efficiency. Even they have delays upon delays. GM and Ford, they have all had delays. I think that's something that's affected everybody. So to your point, I wouldn't be surprised either if we don't actually see any customer deliveries this year. As much as I want that, because the sooner we can get other people having their Apteras, then the sooner I can get mine. I mean, it's not entirely selfish, of course, but I'm not, standing in the first 100 reservation holders or even the first 1,000. I might not even be in the first 10,000. I don't know. So, it might be 2023 later or 2024 before, a lot of people start to see cars that have their name attached to it. And in some ways, maybe that's not bad, because with any startup, you will see some manufacturing gains. They will get better at it as time goes on. So the first few vehicles rolling off the assembly line might not be the ones that you want. You might want the 10,000th or whatever else. But it's exciting. And I can tell that you've really found in Aptera something that you're very excited and passionate about. And that's infectious. The information that you've shared, I think, is very valuable to people that might know about Aptera, but they don't know a whole lot. Or I imagine there will be a number of people that listen to this podcast that have never heard of Aptera. So now we've kind of taken them from this introduction of like, all right, well, let's talk about the company. Let's talk about the car. Let's talk about what their mission is and where they're going. And I think we've hit on all of that. Is there anything before we end that you want to add? Anything that you feel like we might have missed?
Yeah, I would, I guess the big thing is, you kind of touched on this, and that everyone is always wondering about is, will they make it? When are they going to get into production? And, I can't emphasize enough, it's my belief that it's like, in a world where, some of the largest, software and computer manufacturing companies in the world, like Microsoft and Sony, can't secure enough parts in order to make video game consoles. It's hard for me, when Ford can't get enough computers for their vehicles. You look at a smaller company like Aptera, and I think people should be as flexible as possible and not be surprised if there are some delays, because they're not operating in a vacuum. And the other thing is, in terms of optimism for the company, is I really think that their focus on efficiency really sets them up to weather a lot of the challenges that other vehicle startups and EV startups are dealing with in a way. The Aptera option also saves the company money and also saves the computer or the consumer money. There's perfect alignment in the choices that Aptera is trying to make in a way that doesn't necessarily accrue to other vehicles and other companies. And so I see the momentum that they're at now, even for this odd three-wheeled vehicle. I see it growing. I see it particularly when they complete their safety validation testing and they get some independent verification of their range. Right now, there's all these headlines about Lucid, 70-mile-an-hour testing at over 500 miles. But when someone sits there and goes like, oh, by the way, for $35,000, you could get a car that will go somewhere around 600 to 70, or excuse me, 600 to 700 miles. People are going to go, what? Like, what are you talking about? And the going back to the 3.5 seconds 0 to 60 time for 250 miles range, people are going to go like, I'm sorry. And then I think the composite design, that is a cost saving measure that has not really been explored. I try to refer people to Amory Lovins of the Rocky Mountain Institute. He gave a talk back in 2007 about the car of the future, and he talked about composites and how the car of the future would be lightweight but stronger than anything on the road. And that's the Aptera. That this is the vehicle that there are going to be a bunch of weirdos like me who are like, must save money, and people who also want something unique, who are going to go, oh, that's the car for me. And that's where I see them getting through challenges that every other EV, startup is not really, they're not going to, the Aptera solution is not one that other companies can make unless they decide to go all in on efficiency. And that's their big advantage.
I love that you and I both are really looking forward to having an Aptera, but we're coming at it from different angles for different reasons. I love efficiency, but that's not my number one. I like performance. I want to go fast. I want to look cool. And if I can't look cool, I want to look strange. Either way, I want the attention and I want to go fast. I want to shock the hell out of people that I'm just leaving them in the dust. So, it's coming at it from two different angles, but coming together to this place where this vehicle, because it's so customizable, you had mentioned range test. You can now get a car, or will be able to get a car soon, I should say, with 1,000 miles of range. I don't want to do that range test. That's like 16 or 17 hours of driving. 1,000 miles will get you like a third of the way across the country. Can you imagine traveling from coast to coast or doing the cannonball from New York to LA and only having to stop to charge twice? Like that puts it in a completely other world. Absolutely insane.
You bring up an interesting point. It may be the first time that the EPA range estimate is literally an estimate, because they're only going to do the 25 and the 40 kilowatt hour one. And then they're just going to go, we take your word for it. The math checked out. We did not torture someone to make them validate a 600 mile and 1,000 mile. We assumed you were correct. If they're wrong, then sue us.
Believe it or not, the EPA does that for a lot of cars anyway. The EPA doesn't test all of the cars for their official EPA testing. It's I mean, that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and end. Thank you, Chris, for your time and your expertise and your knowledge about Aptera. I appreciate it. I know lots of people that listen to this will appreciate it too. And if you would tell everybody, where can they find the Apt EVs podcast? How can they listen?
Yeah, so the podcast has been going for about a year now. It's available on all podcasting platforms. And because I'm a weirdo and I guess old, I'm on Twitter, but not on YouTube. But you can find me on Twitter at @Apt_EVs podcast. And if you search for Apt EVs, you'll find me on Apple, Google Podcasts, Anchor FM, pretty much anything. Release weekly. And I talk about news and updates for Aptera. So if you enjoy the conversation, tune in.
Wow, what a great conversation. It was actually really refreshing to be able to dig this out of the recording archive that I have and listen to the conversation again with a set of fresh ears. I got a lot out of talking with Chris, and I hope that you really enjoyed the conversation as well. If you do want to follow the Apt EVs podcast, and I would encourage you to do so, I'm going to have a link in the show notes for his Twitter account, as well as to the Apt EVs podcast on Apple Podcast platform. I know most of you who listen to the EV Resource podcast use the Apple Podcast platform, so that seemed like it would be the most appropriate link to use. If you are interested in an Aptera for yourself, and honestly, after listening to this conversation, I don't know why you wouldn't be, I would encourage you to use my referral link in the show notes for $30 off the $100 refundable deposit. That's 30% off for you, and then on my end, I actually get credit towards an Aptera vehicle myself, so it would help in the purchasing process. I currently do have one person that has already done that. I'm looking for a total of 30 though, so if you are thinking about it, go ahead and use my link, and then we'll both benefit. If you want to listen to any of the previous EV Resource Podcast episodes, you can find them on the webpage under the podcast section and all of the best podcast platforms. And if you want more EV Resource content in other ways, I'd encourage you to subscribe to the EV Resource YouTube channel, as well as hop on the webpage and sign up for the monthly digital magazine. You can connect with EV Resource across your favorite social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And before I end for today, I want to thank our Patreon supporters as well. Especially thanks to Rajiv Narayan at the director tier, Christopher Lawrence and Andy Cooper at the executive producer tier. And if you are interested in supporting my efforts with EV Resource, Patreon is going to be the best way to do that. The link that you would want to go to is patreon.com/EV Resource. I invite your feedback for the podcast via email to hello@ev-resource.com. And with that, thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time.